It was a cold afternoon when a little girl, no more than 8 years old, stood outside a shining glass door of one of the city's most luxurious restaurants. Her small hands were pressed against the glass and her tired eyes watched families and business people eating delicious meals. She hadn't eaten properly in 2 days, but that wasn't the only reason she was there. There was something she needed to do, something that made her heart race faster than ever. Inside the restaurant, a man in his late 40s sat at a corner table. His presence drew quiet attention. He was one of the richest businessmen in the city, known for his expensive suits, calm expression, and the way people rushed to serve him. But that day, while he sipped his coffee and spoke to his assistant, he had no idea his life was about to change completely. The little girl pushed the glass door open slowly. The waiters looked at her immediately. Her clothes were old, her shoes were worn out, and her small face showed signs of struggle. One waiter quickly walked toward her, ready to stop her, but she whispered softly, "Please, I need to see him." The waiter frowned. "You can't be here, little one. This place isn't for—" Before he could finish, the girl pointed at the man in the corner. "I just need to talk to him, please, just 1 minute." Something about her voice made the waiter hesitate. He didn't understand why, but he let her walk closer. The room fell a little silent as people noticed her small figure walking between shiny tables and wealthy guests. When she finally reached the man's table, she stopped. The billionaire looked up confused. He had never seen her before, yet her eyes, there was something strangely familiar in them. The girl took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she said, "Dad." The sound of that one word froze the entire restaurant. The assistant looked shocked. The waiters stopped moving. Even the man himself couldn't speak for a few seconds. He blinked, thinking he had misheard. "What did you just say?" he asked in a calm but shaken voice. "Dad," she repeated softly. "You're my father." The man leaned back, his chest tightening. He glanced around, embarrassed by the curious looks from nearby tables. He lowered his voice. "Listen, little girl. I think you've made a mistake. I don't even know you." Tears filled her eyes. She shook her head slowly. "You knew my mom," she whispered. "You promised her something before you left." The assistant immediately stood up, whispering to the man, "Sir, she might be mistaken. Let me call security." But the man raised his hand, signaling him to stop. Something deep inside told him not to send her away. "Not yet. Who is your mother?" he asked carefully. The girl hesitated. Her lips trembled as she said a name that made the billionaire's hand freeze in midair. His face went pale, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. He hadn't heard that name in over 9 years. The restaurant noise faded from his ears. All he could hear was the echo of that name in his mind. The girl looked down, holding the strap of her small bag tightly. "She told me to find you if I ever needed help. She said you would know what to do." The man's heart began to pound. He wanted to believe it was a coincidence, but the look in her eyes, the way she said the name, the sadness in her voice, it all felt too real. His hand shook slightly as he asked, "When did you last see her?" "She's gone," the girl said softly. "She got very sick last year. Before she died, she said, 'You're my dad.' She made me promise to tell you." The words hit him like a storm. He leaned back in his chair, speechless. Around him, people pretended not to look, but everyone could feel the tension in the air. The assistant stepped forward again, but the man lifted his hand once more. "No," he said quietly. "Let her sit." He looked at the little girl with a mix of disbelief, guilt, and something he hadn't felt in years, fear. He wanted to ask 100 questions, but his throat felt dry. Finally, he managed to whisper, "What's your name?" she told him. He repeated it softly to himself, the name sounding both new and painfully familiar. For a moment, his eyes glistened as old memories began to surface, memories he had locked away long ago. The waiter brought her a glass of water. She thanked him politely, her voice still small but steady. The billionaire watched her every movement. She reminded him so much of someone he once loved deeply, someone he had lost because of his own choices. As the girl sat there, the man realized this moment wasn't a mistake. It was something fate had planned all along. And though he didn't know it yet, her appearance would uncover secrets, regrets, and truths he had tried to bury forever. The restaurant had gone strangely quiet. People were still eating, but their ears were turned toward the corner where the poor girl and the billionaire sat. The man's heart pounded as he looked at her small face. Something deep inside told him she wasn't lying. He took a slow breath and said softly, "Tell me everything you know." The girl nodded, her hands shaking a little as she held the glass of water. "My mom told me you were once very kind," she began. "She said you helped her when she was in trouble. You both were close, but then you left, because your work took you away." The billionaire listened silently. Her voice was gentle but carried pain that didn't belong to a child. "She said she never told you about me," the girl continued, "because she didn't want to stop you from living your big dreams. But after she got sick, she told me the truth. She said if I ever met you, I should tell you my name. She said you'd remember." The man swallowed hard. That name, the name the girl had spoken, belonged to someone he had once loved more than anything. Years ago, before his success, before all the money and fame, there had been a simple woman who stood by him when he had nothing. But things changed when his company started growing. He became busy, proud, and distant. Eventually they lost touch. Now sitting across from him was a small piece of that past, alive and breathing. He leaned forward, his voice quieter. "Where have you been living?" "In the old part of the city," the girl replied. "After Mom passed away, I stayed with a kind old lady from our neighborhood. She sells flowers on the roadside. I help her sometimes. I go to school when I can, but things have been really hard lately." The man's chest tightened. He had lived surrounded by comfort, yet his own blood had been living in struggle. The assistant, still standing nearby, looked nervous. He whispered, "Sir, do you want me to arrange something for her?" The billionaire shook his head slightly. "Not now." His eyes never left the girl's face. He spoke again, his tone gentler now. "Why did you come here today? How did you even find me?" The girl looked up with a faint, sad smile. "I saw your picture in a newspaper," she said. "Mom had the same one in an old box. When I saw it again, I knew it was you. So I walked here. I didn't know what would happen, but I wanted to keep my promise to Mom." Her honesty made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, a deep, heavy guilt that words couldn't wash away. He leaned back in his chair, staring at her. "Do you have anything to prove what you're saying?" he asked softly, not with doubt but confusion. The girl opened her small bag and took out a folded old photograph. She handed it to him carefully. His fingers trembled as he opened it. It was a picture of himself, much younger, standing beside a woman he once loved deeply, her mother. In the photo, he was smiling, his arm around her, and she was holding a small pendant that he remembered gifting her years ago. Tears slowly filled his eyes. He tried to blink them away, but they came anyway. The photo was real. The memory was real. And now the child sitting across from him was the living proof of the love he once abandoned. The little girl looked at him quietly, as if she understood everything he was feeling. "Mom said you weren't a bad person," she whispered. "She said you just lost your way." Those words cut deeper than anything else. The man pressed the photo against his chest, closing his eyes. For the first time in many years, he felt the weight of all his choices. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Do you have anywhere to go now?" She shook her head slowly. "Not really. The old lady is sick now. I didn't want to be a burden to her." The man nodded, staring down at the table. He didn't know what to do or say. He had all the wealth in the world, yet in this moment he felt poorer than ever. Finally, he looked at her again. "You'll stay with me tonight," he said gently. "We'll talk more tomorrow. I'll make sure you're safe." Her eyes widened. "Really?" He nodded. "Really?" The waiter, still standing nearby, looked at them with quiet amazement. The billionaire, who was known for being cold and distant, was now speaking softly to a little girl dressed in worn-out clothes. Something about the scene felt pure and life-changing. As they left the restaurant together, whispers filled the air. People stared, wondering who she was and what had just happened. The man didn't care about the stares anymore. For once, he didn't care about reputation, image, or wealth. Outside, the evening lights glowed against the city skyline. The girl walked beside him, still unsure if this was a dream. He opened the car door for her and she climbed in slowly, looking around in wonder. As the car started moving, she looked at him and said quietly, "Mom used to say that one day, you'd remember her." He looked out the window, blinking back tears. "I never forgot her," he said softly. "I just tried to." The girl leaned her head against the seat, her small hands resting on her lap. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. And for the first time in years, he felt human again. Neither of them spoke for a while. But in that quiet drive, Something powerful began to grow between them. A connection that would change both of their lives forever. The car stopped in front of a grand mansion on the edge of the city. The building was tall, elegant, and quiet, the kind of place most people only saw in magazines. The little girl stared through the window, her mouth slightly open. She had never imagined something so big could belong to one person. The billionaire stepped out first and waited for her. "Come," he said softly, trying to sound calm even though his heart was heavy. She followed, walking carefully on the marble steps, her small shoes clicking faintly. As soon as they entered, 2 house staff members came rushing toward them. They stopped in surprise when they saw the girl. One of them whispered, "Sir, who is this child?" He paused for a moment before answering. "She's someone very important." They both nodded and stepped back respectfully. The girl's eyes moved around the large hall. Crystal lights above, expensive paintings on the walls, soft music in the background. Yet despite all the beauty, the house felt empty, almost cold. He noticed her quiet look and said, "You must be hungry." She nodded shyly. "A little." He asked the maid to bring some food. Soon a warm meal was placed in front of her, soup, bread, and fruit. She ate slowly, politely, as if she didn't want to seem greedy. He watched her silently, his thoughts tangled between guilt and disbelief. After dinner, he guided her to a guest room. The room was large and cozy with soft lights and a clean bed. She stood there unsure what to do. "You can rest here tonight," he said. "If you need anything, just call for help." She looked up at him and smiled faintly. "Thank you, sir." He hesitated. "You don't have to call me sir," he said gently. "You can call me whatever you feel is right." She lowered her eyes and whispered, "Dad." For a moment he froze. That word still felt strange yet deeply touching. He gave a small nod and smiled sadly before leaving the room. That night he sat alone in his study. The lights were dim and the old photograph still lay on his desk, the same one she had shown him earlier. His mind went back to those younger days when he had nothing but hope. He remembered how he met the girl's mother, a woman full of kindness and strength. She used to believe in him even when no one else did. They had dreamed of a future together, but when success came, everything changed. He had chosen money over love, ambition over emotion. He had told himself it was for the best, that one day he would return. But life moved too fast and he never looked back. Until now. The memory of her last words before he left haunted him. "Don't forget what truly matters." He had forgotten. Completely. He leaned back in his chair, covering his face with his hands. For the first time in years, he felt tears roll down his cheeks. The next morning, he woke up early and asked one of his staff to prepare breakfast for 2. When the girl came downstairs, wearing clean clothes one of the maids had given her, he couldn't help but notice how much she resembled her mother. The same eyes, the same quiet strength. He smiled slightly. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded. "Yes, thank you." He gestured for her to sit. "I want to ask you something," he said softly. "When your mother got sick, why didn't she try to find me?" The girl hesitated, holding her cup tightly. "She said she didn't want to disturb your life," she said. "She told me you were happy and successful and she didn't want to take that away. She always said he was a good man once. Maybe he still is." Those words hit him again, heavy and painful. He looked away for a moment, trying to hide the emotion on his face. "She was right about one thing," he said quietly. "She was a good woman. I never forgot her, even if I tried to pretend I did." The girl smiled gently. "She used to talk about you a lot. She said you loved helping people and that you wanted to build something big to make the world better." He laughed weakly. "Maybe that's how it started. But somewhere along the way, I lost that purpose." There was silence for a while. Then he said, "Would you like to see something?" She nodded. He took her outside to the garden, a large, peaceful place filled with flowers and fountains. "Your mother loved flowers," he said, picking a small white one. "She always said they remind her that even small things can bring happiness." The girl smiled. "She used to tell me that too." They stood quietly for a while. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Later that day, he called his assistant. "Find everything you can about the woman I once knew," he said firmly. "Her medical records, where she lived, who helped her. I want to know everything." The assistant looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, sir." When the girl heard this, she looked a little worried. You don't have to do that if it makes you sad, she said softly. He smiled faintly. It's not about sadness, he replied. It's about doing what I should have done long ago. She didn't fully understand, but she could feel his sincerity. That night, as she sat on the balcony watching the stars, he quietly stood behind her. Do you miss her? He asked gently. She nodded. Every day he sat beside her. I miss her too, and I promise you, I'll never let you feel alone again. The girl turned her head, her eyes shining with emotion. Really? He smiled softly. Really? In that moment, something inside both of them healed. Not completely, but enough to begin again. The next morning, the house was quiet except for the soft sound of birds outside. The girl sat by the window watching the sunlight touch the garden. She had never felt such peace before. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't worried about her next meal or where she would sleep that night. Downstairs, the billionaire was on the phone with his assistant. His tone was calm, but there was a hint of anxiety behind it. Did you find anything? He asked. Yes, sir, the assistant replied. I tracked down the hospital records and a few people from the neighborhood where she lived. It's all true. She passed away last year from an illness she had been hiding for a long time. It seems she didn't tell anyone until it was too late. The man closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Did she ever try to contact me? The assistant hesitated before answering. Actually, yes, she did. About 9 years ago, she wrote a letter addressed to your company, but back then you were constantly traveling. The letter never reached you. It was returned and stored in the old office archives. I found it. The man's hands trembled as he said quietly, Bring it to me. When he received the old yellowed envelope, his heart raced. The handwriting was soft, familiar, and filled with emotion even before he opened it. He unfolded the paper carefully and began to read. If this letter ever reaches you, I want you to know that I never hated you. Life just took us in different directions. You wanted to build a future and I wanted to build a family. Maybe we both were right in our own ways. But before you left, you gave me something I'll cherish forever. Our daughter. She's kind, brave, and carries your strength. Don't worry, I won't ask for anything. I just hope one day when the time is right, you'll meet her. Not as a stranger, but as her father. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. His voice cracked when he whispered, She still believed in me, even after everything. He sat there for a long time staring at the letter. The guilt in his heart was overwhelming, but mixed with it was something new, a sense of purpose. Later that day, the girl came downstairs and he quickly folded the letter and placed it in his pocket. She looked at him with her small, curious eyes. Are you okay? She asked softly. He smiled weakly. Yes, I'm fine. Just remembering someone special. She nodded quietly and sat beside him. Mom used to write letters too, she said. She said it helps you speak from the heart. He looked at her surprised. Did she ever show you one? The girl shook her head. No, but she used to tell me that one day I'd understand what love means. Not by words, but by what people do for each other. Her innocence and wisdom touched him deeply. He realized that this child wasn't just his daughter. She was a reminder of everything he had lost, and everything he could still make right. That evening, he called his assistant again. I want you to contact the school near her old neighborhood, he said. Make sure her tuition and supplies are covered. And set up a trust fund in her name. No one needs to know it came from me. The assistant nodded. Yes, sir. Should I also, he interrupted softly, and arrange something for the old lady who took care of her? She deserves peace too. When he ended the call, the girl was standing in the doorway, having overheard part of the conversation. You don't have to do all that, she said quietly. Mom said I should never take advantage of anyone. He smiled gently. You're not taking advantage, sweetheart. I'm just trying to be the father I should have been long ago. Her eyes filled with tears. She walked up and hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around him. For a moment he froze, then slowly hugged her back. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like healing after years of emptiness. Later that night, he sat with her in the garden again. The stars were bright and the cool wind carried the scent of flowers. She asked softly, Do you think Mom can see us from up there? He looked up at the sky and smiled. I think she can, and I think she's happy right now. They sat in silence for a while, and then he said, There's something I want to show you tomorrow. Her eyes lit up. What is it? You'll see, he said with a small smile. It's a surprise. The next morning, they drove out of the city to a quiet area near a small lake. There, hidden behind tall trees, was a small cottage. The girl looked at it curiously. What is this place? He took a deep breath. This was where I used to come when I needed to think. Your mother came here once too. We talked about dreams, about the future. It's where I promised her I'd always take care of the people I love. He paused and looked at her. I broke that promise. But now I want to make it right, starting with you. The girl smiled softly. Mom would be happy to hear that. He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. Yes, I believe she already knows. They walked around the lake together, hand in hand. For the first time, the man felt truly free, not from his responsibilities, but from his regrets. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. That night, as they returned home, the billionaire stood by her door before she went to sleep. Good night, he said softly. She smiled. Good night, Dad. The word warmed his heart again. He whispered back. Good night, my little girl. When she fell asleep, he went back to his study, pulled out the letter one last time, and read it again. Then, carefully, he placed it inside a frame on his desk, not as a reminder of guilt, but as a promise that he would never turn away from love again. Days passed quietly after that. The girl began to feel at home in the mansion, though everything still felt like a dream. She had her own room, books to read, warm meals, and people who treated her kindly, but more than all that, she had something she never thought she'd have again. A father's love. The billionaire, too, found his life slowly changing. The house that once felt empty now echoed with laughter, small footsteps, and the soft voice of a child asking simple questions that touched his heart. Every evening she would tell him stories about her mother, about the little joys they used to share, and about the kindness she learned from her. He listened carefully each time, realizing that love had always been near him. He just hadn't seen it. One morning, while reading the newspaper, he noticed a headline about an upcoming charity event, hosted by several business leaders. He had been invited months ago but hadn't planned to attend. Now something inside him told him it was time to go, not as a rich man showing off his power, but as a man ready to share his truth. That evening, as he was getting ready, the girl came into his room. Where are you going, Dad? She asked curiously. To an event, he replied with a smile. But this time you're coming with me. Her eyes widened. Me? But I don't have fancy clothes like the people there. He knelt down and said softly, You don't need fancy clothes. You're perfect just the way you are. Still, he had a small dress made for her, simple, elegant, and white. When she put it on, she looked like a small ray of light. The event was held in the same luxury restaurant where they had first met, the same place where she had walked in, hungry and trembling, and called him Dad in front of everyone. As they entered, people turned their heads. Cameras flashed. Everyone recognized the billionaire, but when they saw the little girl holding his hand, they began whispering curiously. He walked straight to the stage when it was his turn to speak. Normally, his speeches were about business, success, and investments. But that night, his voice carried something different: emotion, truth, and humility. He began softly. For many years, I believed success was about money, power, and respect. I built companies, traveled the world, and owned everything I once dreamed of. But even with all that, I was missing something I didn't realize until recently: love and connection. The audience listened quietly. He took a deep breath and continued. Some weeks ago, something happened that changed my life forever. A little girl walked into this very restaurant and called me Dad. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But when she spoke one name, a name I hadn't heard in years, I realized life had brought me face to face with the truth I had been running from. He looked down at the girl, who was standing beside him on the stage. Her small hand held his tightly. This, he said, his voice trembling slightly, is my daughter. I didn't know about her for years. But today I want the world to know she's the greatest gift life has ever given me. She's taught me what love really means, when not wealth, not fame, but family. The audience was silent for a moment, and then softly people began to clap. The applause grew louder and louder until the whole room was filled with emotion. Some people even wiped their tears. The girl looked up at him with a proud smile. She didn't fully understand how big this moment was, but she could feel the warmth in his voice and the sincerity in his eyes. After the event, reporters tried to ask questions, but he politely refused interviews. This is personal, he said gently. All I want is to be a good father." That night, as they returned home, the girl sat beside him in the car and asked, "Were you scared when you talked about me in front of everyone?" He smiled, a little. "But I was proud too. You gave me the courage to speak the truth." She leaned against his shoulder and said softly, "Mom would be proud of you." He looked out the window, blinking back tears. "I hope so," he whispered. When they reached home, he tucked her into bed. She looked sleepy but happy. "Dad," she murmured, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, sitting beside her. "Will you still love me even if I'm not perfect?" He smiled and brushed her hair gently. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "You just have to be you." "That's all I'll ever need." She smiled and closed her eyes. Within moments, she drifted into peaceful sleep. He watched her for a long time, then turned off the light quietly. As he walked back to his study, he passed by the framed letter, the one written by her mother. He stopped and placed his hand on the frame. "Thank you," he whispered softly. "You kept your promise, and now I'll keep mine." He looked up at the stars through the window. Somewhere deep inside, he felt she was watching, proud, smiling, and finally at peace. From that day forward, the billionaire's life truly changed. He began funding schools for underprivileged children, offering scholarships and supporting families in need. But whenever people asked him why he started doing it, he always gave the same simple answer: "Because one little girl reminded me what love really is." And every evening, when he came home, that same little girl would run toward him with open arms, the same girl who once stood outside a fancy restaurant, calling out a word that changed everything: "Dad." And each time he heard it, it healed him a little more.